This is Entertainment for Review, and we have now reached the final installment in this year's Halloween season review series of Friday the 13th with the 2009 reboot Friday the 13th. This movie came at a time where they were just rebooting all of the classic series, and I admittedly am not a big fan of reboots. I previously had only seen this movie one time when I saw it in the theaters when it first came out when I tried to give it a chance, and had not seen it again until I watched it for this review. In my opinion, reboots are never the way to go. Continue the story, make an additional sequel, but there's no need to reboot and start over. As always, please be aware that if you've not seen this movie, this review will be containing spoilers, and let's start taking a look at Friday the 13th, 2009. The movie starts off very similar to how the original movie ended. We have a camp counselor running through the woods being pursued by Mrs. Voorhees. What we see here that we didn't see in the original movie is that Jason is already back and he's watching this happen from the bushes nearby. He's portrayed as a child with a deformed head. Mrs. Voorhees is telling this counselor that she's the last one, she's killed all the others, and now she's going to kill her and she must be punished for what happened to her son Jason. The counselor uses a machete to cut off the head of Mrs. Voorhees, at which point she leaves and then Jason comes out. He takes his mother's locket along with her severed head. We then jump to Crystal Lake in modern day. We see 5 teenagers hiking through the woods, including Wade, Richie, Amanda, Mike, and Whitney. They are there to try to harvest some marijuana plants that they heard were in the area so that they can sell them. After they set up camp and they're sitting by the campfire, Wade tells them the story of Camp Crystal Lake and Jason Voorhees. Mike and Whitney go off on their own, Richie and Amanda go into their tent, and Wade goes wandering into the woods on his own where he discovers the marijuana. He is also then discovered by Jason, who is giving off some serious vibes of Jason from Friday the 13th Part 2. He is now a grown man and he is wearing a burlap sack on his head. Mike and Whitney discover the old Camp Crystal Lake and go in to look around. They find a cabin that has some interesting things, including Pamela Voorhees' old locket, and he notes that the picture inside looks like Whitney. They also find a bedroom that looks like it once belonged to Jason. Back at the camp, Richie and Amanda are inside their tent, and Amanda thinks that Wade is outside watching their activities. She sends Richie outside to tell him to stop. Richie goes outside and also discovers the crop of plants, and then sees Wade's dead body. Meanwhile, back at the camp, Jason had drugged Amanda out of the tent. When Richie comes back, he sees that Amanda is suspended above the campfire inside of her sleeping bag. He tries to charge over to help, but steps into a bear trap, and Amanda is basically cooked to death inside of her sleeping bag. Back at the cabin, we get some more Friday the 13th Part 2 vibes as they discover the severed head of Mrs. Voorhees inside a wall where Jason had made a shrine to it. Jason then goes onto the floors and begins stabbing upwards with his machete and eventually hits Mike several times and drags him under the floor and kills him. Whitney manages to get out of the cabin and makes it back to the campsite. When she's trying to help Richie out of the bear trap, Jason comes up and kills him with a machete, slicing his head down the middle. He then goes to attack Whitney, but we don't see him get the kill. We then jump ahead 6 weeks where we see a new group of teens on their way to Crystal Lake. This group consists of Trent, Jenna, Bree, Chewie, Lawrence, Nolan, and Chelsea. At the gas station, we also see Clay, who's the sister of Whitney, and he's here looking for her after she's gone missing 6 weeks earlier. Clay and Trent have a brief altercation at the gas station. After leaving the gas station, Clay is stopped by Officer Brack, who basically tells him that he doesn't think his sister is here and he needs to move on. The teens all arrive at Trent's lake house, which is an enormous house. As they start partying, he seems worried that they're going to mess it up. Nolan and Chelsea go off on their own, taking the vehicle to explore the other side of the lake. Clay continues his look for his sister, making multiple stops. He stops at an old woman's house who gives him an ominous warning, and then stops and talks to a farmhand named Donnie, who hasn't seen his sister but tries to sell him some weed, indicating he seems to have found the crop that the other teens found. Clay declines, and when he moves on to the next house, he actually shows up at Trent's cabin. Trent and Clay have another brief altercation, and Jenna tries to be nice and even offers to go help him look for his sister. Back at his barn, Donnie hears a noise upstairs and goes to investigate. While he's there, he's attacked by Jason, still wearing the burlap sack, and he manages to pull it off, revealing Jason's deformed face. Jason then kills him with a slash of the machete. He goes to put his burlap sack back on, but instead spots a hockey mask and decides to wear that instead, thus giving him his signature look. Going against Trent's objections, Nolan and Chelsea decide to use his boat to go water skiing, which Chelsea chooses to do topless. While Nolan's driving the boat, he's shot through the head with an arrow. The boat, then with no driver, hits Chelsea in the head. He spots Jason on the shore and tries to swim away and hides under a dock. He walks out onto the dock and then stabs her through the dock with his machete. Meanwhile, in their search, Clay and Jenna have discovered the remains of Camp Crystal Lake. After their search, when they're about to leave, Jason arrives back at the camp, carrying a dead body. He spots Clay's pack and then begins to try to search, but doesn't find anything, so goes about his way. Clay and Jenna make an escape from the camp. On their way through the woods, they hit a tripwire that rings a bell below the ground. It seems to be a signal that Jason has rigged up to tell him where people are. Then do see that Whitney is still alive, and she's being held captive underground, what I guess we could call Jason's lair. She hears the bell, she tries calling for help. However, Jason soon returns and goes about his business. He sits down, sharpens his machete on a stone wheel, and then remembering what happened to his mother, has a bit of a tantrum. He goes over to Whitney and holds the locket that she's wearing, and seems to respond when she says his name. He seems to be holding her captive because she resembles his mother. Clay and Jenna get turned around in the woods, and Jason is stalking them. He's able to get to her brother's pack that he brought down and sees the flyers in there, and she knows that he's here. Manages to get a little piece of metal out of Wade's old GPS unit, uses it to pick the lock out of her chains, then starts trying to find an exit and discovers Jason's stash of dead bodies. But he does manage to get out and starts running through the woods. Clay and Jenna make it back to Trent's cabin, followed closely by Jason, where the others had been partying and Trent had gone off to sleep with with Bree. Chewie had gone by himself down to the tool shed to get some tools to repair something he'd broken. While he's there, Jason enters the tool shed and kills him. Whitney makes it to the cabin and she's about to bang on the window where Trent and Bree are inside when Jason recaptures her. He then kills the power to the cabin. Lawrence decides to go down to the shed to look for Chewie. He goes down there and discovers his dead body. Jason then comes after him. He manages to get away for a moment, and as he's running back to the cabin, Jason takes him out with one heck of an axe throw. And then finishes the job moments later. At this point, they're all aware of the danger that they're in, and the police have been called but haven't arrived yet. Trent, in frustration, runs upstairs to grab his gun and looks out the window watching for the police. Bree follows him upstairs and is looking around where Jason has slipped inside unbeknownst to them, and he takes out Bree next, stabbing her onto some deer antlers. The police officer, Officer Brack, does arrive. When he comes up and knocks on the door, Jason drops down right behind him, stabs him through the eye, pinning him to the door. Clay, Jenna, and Trent regroup, and then they try to make an escape, but the keys to Clay's bike are gone. Trent tries to use the police car, but Jason throws Bree's body down through the windshield. They all take off running, Clay and Jenna in one direction and Trent in another. Trent stumbles in a creek and drops his gun. He continues out and runs onto a road where he's nearly hit by a truck. The truck driver stops and signals him forward, but he hesitates too long and Jason appears behind him and kills him with a machete, and then pins him to the back of the truck as it drives away. Of all places, Clay and Jenna make it back to Camp Crystal Lake, but it's a good thing that they do because they go back into Jason's cabin and they discover his lair and Whitney chained up beneath. With all else that he's doing, I don't know how Jason had time to get Whitney all the way back to the camp. They manage to free Whitney just as Jason's making his way through the tunnels. I think they find a way out. Clay and Whitney go through first, and as they're trying to help Jenna through, Jason's caught up and stabs her through the back with a machete. Clay and Whitney make it up into an abandoned school bus. As they're trying to get out, Jason has come around another way and attacks Clay. He goes in the bus to try to get Whitney, but she manages to get out. Her and Clay flee, and they make it back to Donnie's barn. Whitney hides as Clay looks for Jason or a weapon. Jason then grabs him through a window, but he's able to get away, and then Jason comes into the barn, and they continue to fight. Jason is trying to push Clay's head into the wood chipper, and Whitney comes out, and much like what happened at the end of Friday the 13th Part 2, as she looks like his mother, she distracts him. This allows Clay time to resume his attack, and he wraps a chain around his neck, and Whitney throws the chain into the wood chipper, and it pulls Jason up over a beam and starts hanging him. However, the board does give way, it falls down, and the chain in the wood chipper continues to pull Jason in. It seems like he might be about to get away when Whitney causes him to turn around and stabs him through the chest with a machete. They should have pushed him the rest of the way into the wood chipper. Instead, next morning, instead of having already left, they have taken Jason's body down to the dock of the lake, and they push it in, along with the hockey mask and the locket. And moments later, we get our traditional shock ending, as Jason bursts through the dock moments later, wearing the hockey mask again, and grabs Whitney to end the movie. I may have been too harsh on this movie when it first came out in 2009, but it's still not one of my favorites in the series by far. Loses a lot of points for me by being a reboot, which just didn't need to be rebooted. There are many more sequel possibilities they could have gone down rather than rebooting the series fresh. My number one complaint about this movie is that I am not a fan at all of the portrayal of Jason in this movie. I don't like that they gave him a secret layer of underground tunnels. I don't like his overall demeanor and physical movements. I feel like they normalized him a bit, and I don't like that. He had rigged up bells so he knew where people were. I like to think of Jason as just a straightforward killer, not a planner or a schemer. The movie does throw in a few Easter eggs that are enjoyable that throw back to the earlier movies, mainly parts 1 and 2, such as the head of Mrs. Voorhees, Jason wearing a burlap sack, even a wheelchair that's seen in Jason's tunnels could be a throwback to one of his kills from part 2 of the original series. And he clearly still has some supernatural elements to him as he comes back to life at the end of this movie, like in the others. They do make a choice at the beginning, which is to show him seeing his mother's death. Begs the question, did he really drown? And had he come back? And did Mrs. Voorhees even know he was back? As always, we get a lot of questions and we don't get all the answers. That's why sometimes I don't like when these movies try a little harder than they should to try to explain things. Sometimes it's better to keep things a little simpler and keep an air of mystery about it. Trying to explain too much just does sort of take the fun out of it. For Jason's appearance in this movie, they decided to go back a little bit too, and he appears a little bit more normalized as just a big, hulking, giant, disfigured man, like how he would appear as more of a walking corpse in later movies. He is definitely physically imposing, but I wouldn't call him peak Jason. Does land an impressive 13 kills in this movie. 13 kills for the rebooted Friday the 13th. We see Mrs. Voorhees die in the opening flashback, but I don't count that in the total. Initially, Jason kills Wade, Amanda, Mike, and Richie. When they jump forward 6 weeks, he kills Donnie, Nolan, Chelsea, Chewie, Lawrence, Bree, Officer Brack, Trent, and finally Jenna. I was surprised to see Jenna killed in this movie. It seemed like she would be a survivor, but it's good to throw in surprises like that. This movie was not super well received, but slightly higher than average of some of the other movies. On Rotten Tomatoes, it got a 25% score from critics, a 46% score from audiences, and over on IMDb, it got a 5.5 out of 10. For me, I score this movie at a 5 out of 10. Sadly, to date, this is the final installment in the Friday the 13th franchise, currently in the longest drought of no Friday the 13th films since the original movie debuted in 1980. There's a little hope on the horizon as the Crystal Lake series is supposed to be debuting soon. Hope that does well, but my real hope is that leads to more movies in the franchise. Honestly, I'd rather have bad Jason than no Jason. Let me know your thought on this 2009 reboot of Friday the 13th in the comment section below. Please be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel and keep an eye out for my next video coming soon.